All right, let's get into it. We're going to talk about one of the most overlooked parts of the human eye, but also one of the most vital, the vitreous humor. You know, it's easy to just think of it as a simple gel, but it has this incredible life story, from its super complex creation in the womb to its inevitable breakdown in old age. It's really the eye's unsung hero, and, as we'll see, sometimes its biggest villain.
And get this, it is not a small part of the eye. This clear, jelly-like stuff makes up a staggering 80% of the eye's total volume. It's what fills that whole space between the lens and the retina, giving the eyeball its shape. Just let that sink in for a second. 4/5 of your eye is this amazing biological gel.
So, to really get a handle on it, we're going to follow its entire life story. First, we'll do a proper introduction. Then, we'll go way back to see how it develops from an embryo. After that, we'll check out the anatomy of this gel when it's in its prime. And from there, well, we'll watch what happens during its inevitable aging process and wrap up with the clinical consequences of its decline.
Okay, so our story starts way back, before we're even born. The development of the vitreous is like this beautifully orchestrated 3-act play that all goes down in the first few months of pregnancy.
It all unfolds in 3 distinct stages. You've got the primary vitreous, then the secondary, and finally, the tertiary. And each stage literally builds on the last one, transforming what starts as a temporary feeding system into the permanent structure we have for most of our lives.
So, Act 1 kicks off around the 4th week of gestation. This is the primary vitreous. It's basically a web of fibers filled with blood vessels, with the main one being the hyaloid artery. Its job is super important, but totally temporary. It acts as a scaffold and brings all the nutrients to the developing lens. But once that job is done, it's designed to just disappear. Then, in the 2nd month, the real permanent vitreous starts to form. This is the secondary vitreous, and the key difference is that it's avascular, meaning 0 blood vessels. As this clear gel made of collagen and hyaluronic acid expands and fills up the eye, it basically squishes that old, regressing vascular system into a tiny little remnant in the center called Clocate's canal. And finally, around month 3, the tertiary vitreous shows up. Now, this isn't a whole new gel. Think of it more as a specialization of the secondary vitreous right at the edges. This stage is responsible for creating 2 supercritical structures: the lens zonules, those are the fibers holding the lens in place, and the vitreous base, which becomes the absolute strongest attachment point between the vitreous and the retina. And all that work brings us to the vitreous in its prime, a fully formed, perfectly clear, stable gel that's going to serve the eye well for decades. Its structure is just a masterpiece of biological engineering.
So how does this whole thing work? Well, believe it or not, it's 99% water. But that water isn't just sloshing around. It's locked in place by this incredibly intricate molecular network. The 2 main players here are long, skinny collagen fibrils that create the framework and these big coils of hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is incredibly hydrophilic. It loves water, so it basically grabs all that water and inflates the collagen network, creating that perfect, stable, transparent gel. And this is just a brilliant way to see it. On the left, that's a dissected vitreous from a young eye. See how it's a perfectly clear, solid piece of gel? But then you zoom way in to the microscopic level, on the right, and you see the reason why. It's this dense, tangled web of collagen fibrils. That's the hidden architecture that gives the vitreous its shape and lets it do its job. Now, the vitreous isn't just floating around in there. It's physically attached to the retina at what we call the vitreoretinal interface. You can see right here how these little anchoring fibrils from the outer layer of the vitreous, the cortex, actually dive into and fuse with the retina's innermost layer, the internal limiting membrane, or ILM. It's a really strong, but also really delicate bond.
And for anyone in ophthalmology, this is a huge clinical pearl. That attachment isn't the same strength everywhere. The strongest adhesion, by far, is at the vitreous base, that ring of tissue near the front of the eye that formed way back in the embryonic stage. Other strong spots are at the optic disc and the macula. And this is so important because even as the vitreous ages and starts pulling away from the retina, that vitreous base almost always stays locked in place.
So, when it's young and healthy, the vitreous is doing 3 main jobs. Mechanically, it's a shock absorber, protecting the super delicate retina. Metabolically, it works like a pantry for nutrients, like glucose, and a garbage can for waste products. And optically, its perfect clearness gives light a totally unhindered path to travel from the lens straight to the retina. It's perfect.
But this is where the story takes a turn. What was once this perfectly designed structure now begins a slow, inevitable process of breaking down. It's a gel in decline.
So, the big question is, what exactly happens to this beautiful gel structure as we get older? I mean, why does this molecular architecture that served us so well for so long start to fail?
This graph tells you everything you need to know. Just look at the two lines. The top line is the volume of gel, and the bottom is liquid. For the first 40 years of life or so, things are pretty stable. But right around age 40, the gel starts a steady decline, and the amount of liquid starts to rise to take its place. By the time we're in our 80s or 90s, more than half of our vitreous is just liquid. We call this whole process liquefaction.
And this breakdown is really driven by two things happening at the same time. The first is Synchysis. That's the liquefaction itself. The gel breaks down and releases the water it was holding, forming these watery pockets. At the exact same time, you have Synchysis. And this is where the collagen fibrils, which are no longer being kept apart by that hyaluronic acid network, start to clump together into thick bundles.
This diagram shows you exactly what that Synchysis looks like up close. On the left, that's the young vitreous, with all the collagen fibrils spaced out nicely. On the right, those same fibrils have clumped up into these thick bundles, and this causes two huge problems. First, these bundles are now big enough to cast shadows on the retina, which we see as floaters. And second, as the collagen clumps, the whole gel structure just collapses, which makes the liquefaction even worse.
And that brings us to the final chapter, and honestly, the most clinically important one. This age-related breakdown isn't just some interesting science fact. It's the root cause of some of the most common and serious eye problems we see every day.
And here it is, the core problem. As the gel collapses and turns to liquid, the part that's still gel becomes unstable. It starts to shrink and pull away from the retina. This pulling force is what we call vitreoretinal traction, and it is the central villain behind a whole host of age-related vitreous issues.
It all starts with these pockets of liquid, or lacunae, forming. As they get bigger and start to merge together, the whole gel structure gets weaker and less stable. It really sets the stage for a total collapse. Plus, that liquid can sneak in behind the vitreous cortex and help peel it right off the retina.
And that leads to step 2, the collapse itself. The shrinking vitreous gel pulls away from the back of the eye. This event is called a posterior vitreous detachment, or a PVD. At those spots where the attachment is still really strong, like around blood vessels or at the macula, this pulling can actually stimulate the photoreceptors, causing those flashes of light people see. Or, even worse, it can physically tear the retina, which can lead to a retinal detachment.
And this really brings us to the great paradox of the vitreous, doesn't it? The very same structure that is so critical for the eye's development and healthy function when we're young, with its firm attachments and stable gel, becomes the source of major problems as we get older. What was once a protector becomes a potential threat.
You know, understanding this entire life cycle, from embryology all the way to degeneration, is absolutely fundamental in ophthalmology. It explains everything from simple floaters to devastating retinal tears. Which, of course, leaves us with the big question for the future. Since this decline is going to happen to all of us, how can we get better at managing the consequences?